This morning in Bible class, we're in 1 Samuel chapter 12. If you have your handout with you, that's about page 3 toward the bottom there, verses 12 through 18. And Samuel has pointed out all the things in their history that have brought them to a point where they are requesting a king to be over them rather than simply submitting to the will of God. God is their king. They are asking for an earthly king, and so that's going to be granted for them. And Samuel's pointing out their history and how it brought them to this particular rebellion. And that's what it was, a rebellion, asking for an earthly king rather than submitting to God's rule alone. So we get to verse 12, and Samuel's going on with this line of reasoning. When you saw that Nahash, the king of the sons of Ammon, came against you, you said to me, no, but a king shall reign over us, although the Lord your God was your king. Now, therefore, here's the king whom you've chosen, whom you've asked for. Behold, the Lord has set a king over you. And then you have some conditional thoughts there in verses 14 and 15. Here's the positive side of this. If you will fear the Lord and serve Him and listen to His voice and not rebel against the command of the Lord, then both you and also the king who reigns over you will follow the Lord your God. So you've asked for a king. That was not a good thing for you to do. God was your king. But here's the king you've asked for. God's let you have your way in this. But here's a condition. And here's the point. God's rules have not changed. You wanted a king, here's a king. You, your king, need to submit to the will of God. If you'll do that, you'll continue to serve God and things are going to go all right. So that's the positive side. There's a way through this. Here's your if. But then you get to the negative side of that, verse 15. If you will not listen to the voice of the Lord, but rebel against the command of the Lord, then the hand of the Lord will be against you as it was against your fathers. So there's the negative side of that. If you'll do this, all right, and if you won't, then here's the other way that it's going to go. And then verse 16 and 17, here's the proof. Here's how you know this is from God. You know what this is not? This is not a disgruntled old man complaining. This is not just Samuel who's grown old in years and needs to step out of the way, make way for another. This is not just a disgruntled old man making this stuff up. This is from God. Here's your proof. Even now, take your stand and see this great thing which the Lord will do before your eyes. Is it not the wheat harvest today? I will call to the Lord that He may send thunder and rain. Then you will know and see that your wickedness is great, which you've done in the sight of the Lord by asking for yourselves a king. Important, this is a dry season. Thunder and rain at this time would be extremely unusual. And it puts the crops in great danger. So here is something unusual, and this is not a weatherman kind of thing. Sorry, Brad, Nicole. You know where, well, you got a 50% chance of rain or not rain, or looking off in the distance and seeing a weather pattern, you see a small cloud on the horizon, and you go, well, that could come this way, or it could go that way, and it might rain, or it could go this to the north, and you might miss it altogether. It's not like that. There would have been no clue. It would have been a clear sky. It was the wheat harvest. It was the dry season. And Samuel said, I'm going to pray to God, and I want you to watch what happens. This is a miraculous nature. And that's why it was so powerful to them. It endangered the crops. It was in the dry season. It was on the word of a prayer and fulfilled in such a way. This is like when you're reading in the book of James about Elijah. This is like that. And so Samuel called to the Lord, and the Lord sent thunder and rain that day, and all the people greatly feared the Lord and Samuel. So it was a very powerful thing when he prayed for rain and that thunder came. So they realized at that point they've made another mess. Following the line of reasoning that Samuel's given them in previous verses, that here's what your ancestors did, here's how they rebelled against God, and you're of the same cut. You've done the same kind of thing in asking for a king, and now they're realizing we've done it again. We've rebelled against God. We've made a real mistake. What do you do when you realize you've made a mess? Is there a way through that? So now we get to verses 19 through 25. Then all the people said to Samuel, "Pray for your servants to the Lord your God, so that we may not die. For we've added to all our sins this evil by asking for ourselves a king." Samuel said to the people, "Do not fear. You've committed all this evil. Yet do not turn aside from following the Lord, but serve the Lord with all your heart. You must not turn aside, for then you would go after futile things which cannot profit or deliver, because they're futile." So what do you do after committing a sin? What do you do when you finally recognize that? You didn't see it, now you're in the middle of it and you've got trouble. What do? Well, I've gone this far, I might as well go the rest of the way. Well, I'm in this spot, what's the point now? I might as well just keep on going. That's not the answer. That's not what Samuel tells them at all. Even though you've committed all this evil, yet do not turn aside. Don't keep going that way. Don't give up hope. Don't stop serving the Lord. Here you are in this spot, but there's a way through that, and it's not going to be easy. But this is what you need to do in this case. I think this is a really good text for all of us today. Who of us have not been in a place where we've made a mess because we went our own way? All right, here I am in it. Now what am I going to do? Well, I might as well just give up. That's not what he said. Verse 22. For the Lord will not abandon His people on account of His great name, because the Lord's been pleased to make you a people for Himself. Moreover, as for me, here's another question. All right, here's this group. They've made a real mess. They've sinned. What do the faithful ones do? Those who remain faithful. What do they do in that situation? Verse 23, moreover, as for me, far be it from me that I should sin against the Lord by ceasing to pray for you. But I will instruct you in the good and right way. Only fear the Lord and serve Him in truth with all your heart, for consider what great things He's done for you. But if you still do wickedly, both you and your king will be swept away. So now there's a real choice in front of them. There was a choice in the beginning, do it God's way, or look around you at all these nations and want to follow them. Well, they went the wrong way. All right, now they've been convicted of that. Now what are you going to do? Now you have another choice. And so Samuel tells them how to get through this, but he doesn't tell them that it's going to be easy. They're begging for Samuel, keep praying for us. Please don't give up on us. And still speak to God on our behalf. But I want you to notice something. If you trace this all the way back to chapter 8 and verse 7, God had to tell Samuel, Samuel, listen to them, give them the king they're asking for. They have not rejected you, they've rejected me from being king over them. He had to remind Samuel because as they first asked for a king, that was an insult to Samuel. Samuel has personally been wounded. And God had to tell Samuel, Samuel, they've not rejected you. You were in the path between me and them. They trampled over you because they were trampling on me. They've rejected me. They haven't rejected you. So he had to remind him, this insult, Samuel, it's about me. What they've done to me. You were in the way. So you feel the impact of that. They insulted Samuel in this process. And they beg him now, keep praying for us. And Samuel said, that's who I am. Regardless of what you do or what anybody else does, I'm faithful. And the faithful pray. And if you go to the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 4, toward the end of that, about verse 44, we're taught to pray for our enemies. Pray for their good. Still try to help them in their journey toward God. Keep on doing it. That's what the faithful people do. They don't sit back, fold their arms, and hope somebody gets what they deserve. That's not what faithful people do. They keep trying and they keep on in their godly ways. So we don't disengage because somebody else does the wrong thing. We don't become unfaithful because somebody else does. So here's this mess. And I remembered, as Samuel tells them, don't keep on doing wickedly. And sometimes people get in that frame of mind. They feel like they've dug such a deep hole, they don't know how to get out of it. They don't know what to do. And so they just keep going in deeper. And I remember it's probably not appropriate anymore today. There's so much you just, you don't say so much anymore today because somebody always gets offended over just about everything. But back when I was a kid, I remember if you were digging a deep hole and somebody came by, they might say, what are you going to do, dig all the way to China? Meaning that if you just keep on digging, you're going to go all the way through and pop your head out on the other side of the earth. But if you've chosen sin, and that's the hole you're in, that's the hole you're digging, and you keep on digging in that hole, you don't pop your head out on the other side. You don't dig your way the wrong way and get out the other side of that okay. It doesn't work that way. So Samuel tells him, you do not keep on doing wickedly. You keep on serving the Lord now. You realize what you've done, but if you're going to get out of this hole you've made for yourself, you need to come out of this the right direction. And you need to start serving God with all your heart. And so that's what he tells them to do. And I said before, it will not be easy, and it will not be convenient. You look as you follow from 1 Samuel through 2 Samuel, 1 and 2 Kings, all the way through their captivity. You look at all the history they have to go through and all the trouble their kings brought in. United kingdom, divided kingdom, north, south. You look at all the problems that brought to them as a nation. It was not an easy and convenient path to serve the Lord with all your heart. Very few were able to do that, and it was difficult. But that's the way out. So here is a change that needs to take place, and I want to rely on a text again in James chapter 4 to emphasize this. There is a change in attitude. There's a change in thought process. There's a change in habits and behavior. James 4, beginning in verse 7, submit therefore to God. There's a directional change. You were not submitting to God. Now, submit therefore to God, resist the devil. You were submitting to the devil and resisting God. Here's a direction change. Submit therefore to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Draw near to God. You were moving further away at one point, but now draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners. This is about action. This is about habit. This is about behavior, what you're doing. So, change of direction, and then change of action, change of habit. Cleanse your hands and purify your hearts. Here's the thought process. Here's the mind. Change your mind. Change your action. Directional change. Purify your hearts, you double-minded. Verse 10, humble yourselves in the presence of the Lord, and He will exalt you. That's how you get out of the hole. He will exalt you out of it. He'll lift you up out of that mess. But it's not easy and it's not convenient. And that same thought that's in James 4 is what Samuel's telling them to do as we get to the end of chapter 12. Any comments on that chapter before we close it up and move on? I have a new handout for you. If I could get a couple of men to help me with that, we'll get those out as quickly as we can. This is going to take us into chapters 13 and 14, and we will get working on that. Thank you very much. As we begin looking at this, I want you to notice the title. Jonathan pokes a bear. And if you're familiar with the text, if you know where we're going in chapters 13 and 14, you know exactly what that's about. Jonathan really stirs something up as we get into these chapters and begin to study them. We have just come out of the new king being inaugurated, and he has run into his first military test against the Ammonites. They raised up against the brethren on the east side of the Jordan River, Jabesh Gilead, and they called for help. And Saul's had no testing at that point, and he raises an army. Anybody remember the numbers that assembled to him? How many people came to him to fight that battle we just got out of? Anybody remember? Thank you. That was 300,000 plus 30,000 of Judah. So 330,000 he raised in that battle. That's massive. I want you to notice a drastic difference when we get to this section of study. That was an emergency raising of military to meet a threat that had a city besieged and threatening to gouge out their eyes, and were doing horrible things to those people. This is different. And we're going to come from over 300,000 to 3,000. What a difference. But that's where we're going. So he had his first military test, and it was a great success. But when we get to chapters 13 and 14, here is a failure. And we're going to learn something in this about the character of King Saul. And one of the things you'll notice as you read chapters 13 and 14, there's very little said about a battle. The battle's not the main point. The main point of this is learning about the character of King Saul. And there's a point to be made about that as we move forward. He is moving on in impulsive, knee-jerk kind of reaction. There's a battle brewing with the Philistines this time, and things aren't going well. His army, small as it is beginning to desert him, and he has a panic attack. And he does something that is unfaithful in nature. And so there's our great reminder for the rest of the morning. As you get into these places in life where you have a panic moment, where things are going wrong, and you have this knee-jerk reaction that's built on your emotion, back off that and think about what God's will is. what is the right Bible thing to do? What's the right Bible reaction to this? And do that instead. Saul didn't do that in this case. That knee-jerk reaction, that panic that he was in, caused him to do something unfaithful and then start making excuses about why it was okay. And that's usually what happens. We are looking at some situation in life and saying the rules are different because of this situation, and that's why I did what I did, and it's okay. It's not okay. Right is right, and wrong is wrong. Chapter 13, I want you to notice the way it begins. I'm in the New American Standard Update. I don't know what translation you have. They all will handle this a little bit differently. Verse 1. Saul was 30 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 42 years over Israel. Who has something different? Sandra, what do you got? He was 40 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 32 years? Interesting. That's quite a bit different, isn't it? Anybody else? All right. Well, that's fun, isn't it? All right, we'll close class for here. Yes. The New King James doesn't have that at all. What does it have? The New King James, Saul reigned 1 year. And when he had reigned 2 years, and then it goes on to the next verse. That's different still, isn't it? All right, let me do this. Let's go to Acts 13. Acts chapter 13. Verse 21. Acts 13, verse 21. Then they asked for a king, and God gave them Saul, the son of Kish, a man of the tribe of Benjamin, for how long? 40 years. How long did he reign? 40 years. Acts 13:21 is rather definite. That is specific. He reigned 40 years. Now, go back to our text in 1 Samuel 13, verse 1. I don't know how your translation handles it, but in the New American Standard again, Saul was 30 years old. The word 30 is italicized. What does that mean? They added it. There's no number there. There's no number in the Hebrew text. Saul was blank years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 42 years. The word 40, italicized. So if you just leave it the way it is and stop supplying things, it comes out this way. Saul was blank years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 2 years over Israel. That's not telling us the total number of years that Saul reigned. It's telling us that Saul began to reign, and after he reigned 2 years, then these things began to transpire. Then these things happened. It's telling us he's 2 years into his reign, and then this happened. Acts 13:21 tells us the longevity of his reign. He reigned 40 years. During most of that 40, he'd already been rejected by God. But he was still on the throne officially. But he reigned 40 years. But 2 years after he reigned, these things began to happen. So when translators are trying to smooth out the sound of that in English, they're supplying some numbers in there that they think make sense in what they think it might say. But if you just leave the italicized words out of it, it makes more sense. He's 2 years into his reign, and then this happened. And that's the sense of what's going on in this particular case. Our attention is going to focus on the initial small military of Saul and the division of the troops between himself and his son Jonathan, verses 2 through 4. Now Saul chose for himself 3,000 men of Israel, had over 300,000 previously, but they have to go back home. They have farms to run and sheep to look after and families to take care of. So he chose for himself 3,000 men of Israel, of which 2,000 were with Saul at Michmash and in the hill country of Bethel, while 1,000 were with Jonathan at Gibeah of Benjamin. Now, let me tell you, I made an oops. Here's the oops that I made. I supplied you with a map, and I had a better map than that. I could have given you a better map. I have one map in my study notes, and through a brain slip, I put a map on your handout that's not quite as good. It's zoomed in a little bit more, so you can't see Gibeah. When you see Geba, G-E-B-A, that's not Gibeah. Gibeah of Benjamin is down to the south of that. And yours does not show Gilgal. Gilgal's off to the right side of that map. And so you don't have some of the places on there, but you have a zoomed in version of that, and so you have to use your imagination a little bit, and I'll give you some distances as we go through class. This is not a big area. It's not a big area at all. So Saul has kept 2,000 around him. 1,000 are with Jonathan at Gibeah of Benjamin, but he sent away the rest of the people, each to his tent. Jonathan smote the garrison of the Philistines that was at Geba. So Jonathan's meandered northward from Gibeah of Benjamin, and he's wandered northward, and he found a Philistine outpost there at Geba, and Jonathan attacks it. And so this is how Jonathan pokes the bear. And the Philistines heard of it. Then Saul blew the trumpet throughout the land, saying, "Let the Hebrews hear." All Israel heard the news that Saul had smitten the garrison of the Philistines, and also that Israel had become odious to the Philistines. The people were then summoned to Saul at Gilgal. So this area is just a few miles. It's in the inheritance of the tribe of Benjamin. Saul is in a place called Michmash. He has 2,000 men spread between Michmash and Bethel. Bethel's to the northwest about 4.5 miles. It's not a big area. Jonathan has another 1,000 down there at Gibeah off the south point of your map, about 4.5 miles southwest of Michmash. Again, this is not a big map. It's not a big area. From Bethel to Gibeah, from Bethel to where Jonathan is with his 1,000, that whole distance is about 7 miles. Between Gibeah of Benjamin and Michmash, you find this place called Geba that is a Philistine outpost. And Jonathan pokes the bear by attacking them. Saul blows the trumpet with a message, "Let the Hebrews hear." I don't know what you make of that. Let the Hebrews hear. The nation of Israel is made up of Hebrews. Hebrew is a term that was applied to Abraham, Abram back then. He was a Hebrew. So they're all Hebrews. But you're going to notice a couple of times in this chapter there's a distinction between Israel and the Hebrews. And what I'd like you to do is to look up to chapter 14 and verse 21. Now the Hebrews who were with the Philistines previously went up with them all around in the camp. Even they also turned to be with Israelites who were with Saul and Jonathan. You hear the distinction? Hebrews who were where? Hebrews is a reference to those who lived among the Philistines, had gotten comfortable living amongst the Philistines, who were just going day in and day out around the Philistines. Israelites were with Saul and Jonathan. I don't know that that's what it means all the way through, but I'm getting an indication that when Saul blew the trumpet, he wanted the Hebrews, those who were living amongst the Philistines, to know what Jonathan just did at Geba. And the Philistines are going to be out for the heads of all Israelites. All the Hebrew people are going to be in danger because of what Jonathan just did. So he sounds the trumpet so the Hebrews would hear, and I'm understanding that to mean those who are living amongst the Philistines, now they're odious. Now there's a problem. You might remember back to some war days, back around World War II, when we were at war with Japan, and how some people felt about those who had moved from Japan to the United States of America and some of the mistreatment that took place there. You might think about some today we're at war, have been at war with terrorists in the Middle East. And there are many who live among us in the United States of America. Some people are good, some people are bad. You have to wait and see what their actions are. But there is a certain skepticism. There is a certain bias and prejudice about some things. And even though you don't know a person personally, because of what's happened elsewhere, you have a very definite feeling about certain people and certain things. So Jonathan with his 1,000 attacked the outpost, but you have Hebrews living amongst the Philistines. What's going to happen to them? If the Philistines go on the warpath now and they're going to be out after all of those who are of the nation of Israel, of that nationality, then there could be some real trouble. Saul sounds the trumpet so all the Hebrews will hear, and they'll know something's happened. And we're going to find them later coming to join Jonathan and Saul. They're coming out of living in the communities of the Philistines to join Jonathan and Saul. And that's the distinction I'm hearing between Israelites and Hebrews in this text. And whether that's exactly so all the way through, I'll let you be the judge of that as you study through it. But that's the implication that I'm picking up on with that. So he sounds the trumpet, and everybody knows when they do that. I want you to notice who gets blamed for the attack. Everybody knows that Saul did it. So his son Jonathan attacked the outpost, but he blows the trumpet, and everybody knows it's what Saul did. So what Jonathan did reflects upon his father. Isn't that always true? Whatever we do individually reflects on this congregation, doesn't it? Whatever you do reflects on your family name. And what Jonathan did reflected upon his father. This is what Saul did. That's what everybody came to think about. And then the Israelites had become odious. That's not a good word. We buy cologne and perfume so we smell good. We take a bath so we smell good. The trash is odious. And when the trash is odious, we take it out because it stinks. And the Philistines were tolerating the Israelites They had them under their thumb, but when this rebellion happened, now they became odious to the Philistines, and there's going to be a real problem. So Saul's going to be withdrawing, and there's going to be regrouping at Gilgal. Again, that's off to the east side of your map. It's not on your map, but they're going to be withdrawing and regrouping at Gilgal. Gilgal is much closer to the Jordan River. It was a stopping place when they first crossed the river coming into Canaan land. They're going to regroup there. And the Philistines are now moving on Michmash, chapter 13, verse 5. They're headed that way. Israelites are regrouping at Gilgal. And here comes the setup for the battle. But the point is not the battle itself or the outcome. There's very little said about that in the text. The point is we're going to learn about the character of King Saul and how he handles this emergency. When our faith is tested, that's when we learn who we really are. James chapter 1, verses 2 through 4. Consider it all joy, my brethren, when you encounter various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance, and let endurance have its perfect result, so that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. That's the intended outcome when our faith is tested. When faith is tested, you find out who you are. Peter denied Jesus. He went out and wept bitterly. He learned something about himself when he was tested in that way, and he ended up coming out of it a better man because of it. In this case, Saul is tested, and it's going to turn out very differently than the battle with the Ammonites. This time, he just folds up and makes all kinds of compromises. You understand we can be successful and victorious today? Ammonites? Great. 2 years into the reign, this happens. And 2 years later, he folds up like the cheap house of cards. His faith compromises all over the place, and he has all kinds of excuses about why it was all right. That's where we're going next week. So here's this great success, but down the road, here's a failure, and we learn about a character flaw that makes him unfit to be the king. Any comments before that final buzzer sounds? Bring this new handout back with you. We'll be on it for at least a couple more weeks. And we'll dismiss class at this time. Thank you for your good attention.